Hey there, and welcome to the Catching Up with Casey show, where we talk about anything and everything that has to do with building cohesive, vision-driven teams. I am Casey Watts, school impact strategist and the host of this show. Now, if you are here, then you inevitably are an instructional leader who wants to make change happen, even when change seems impossible. And you can do that if you have cohesive, vision-driven teams that have done clarity work. They know exactly where they're headed and how they're going to get there. These teams have done identity work, and they've built their self and social awareness skills. And they have done collaboration work, and they know how to move beyond faux collaboration to get to true collaboration where change happens and where people get on board. I'm so excited to bring to you conversations that help you to do exactly that. The work that needs to be done to build cohesive, vision-driven teams. Now, with all of that said, let's dive into today's conversation. Well, hey there, everybody. Welcome to episode 61 of the Catching Up with Casey show. Tonight, I am pumped about our episode because we're going to be talking about not just adult behaviors, but also student behaviors. And I'm joined by Mike Desparrois. And Mike, I'm going to allow you to take a moment to tell us a little bit about who you are, where you're from, and what your aspirations are.
Oh, all right. Well, I'll start with where I'm from. I'm originally from Colorado. I grew up in Littleton, Colorado. It's actually where I started my teaching career at a homeless shelter for kiddos who were between 13 all the way up to right before their 18th birthday. It was a short-term facility. So like immediately I fell in love with behavior and saw how importantly relationships were, just because a lot of people at the time would call these kids the throwaway kids of society. And not just, being like 20, 4 or whatever I was at the time, it just absolutely crushed me because behind everything, there's a human who just needs help, right?
Yes.
And the group of humans who worked at this shelter, they were all in on these kids. So a little different from when I moved to public school and kind of saw some of the differences. So after that, I moved down, me and my wife moved down to Midland, Texas, and she's an educator as well, too. And I worked in what they used to call, unfortunately, the emotionally disturbed unit at a 9th grade high school. And I had about 13 boys and 1 girl. And these kids had basically been self-contained since they were young kindergartners. They'd always been together, and this was anti-inclusion time. Inclusion was a bad word. So, as long as I just kept them in the room and kept them quiet, then they were happy with my performance. And that's not really how it's supposed to work.
Right.
So we started sneaking kids into other rooms, and people I knew who would like them and have good relationships with them. And then I had an opportunity after 4 years of doing that to move to the junior high and start an inclusion program where all the special ed teachers were going to work with all of the general ed teachers as well too, and go into classrooms and stuff like that. And I found my love because junior high kids are the greatest things in the world. Right. I just love working with junior high kids.
Are they? Are they the greatest things in the world?
Oh my gosh. You can be talking to a kid who's 6'3" with a beard and his best friend standing next to him, and he's 4'7", right? Yeah. I mean, it's just anything they show up with every day. It's just kind of humorous and fun and everything else. So yeah, I really enjoyed that time. So I was there for several years, and then I got a call from Region 18 Education Service Center here in Midland, and they wanted to hire me as an inclusion specialist because at that point in time they didn't even have an inclusion program. So I kind of got started doing that. And then they found out all my work in behavior. So guess what? They're like, hey, you're a behavior specialist. So
Yeah.
you kind of never leave that behind, which is fine because I kind of always loved it. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's so cool. And now tell us about what you're doing, because I know you really from online platforms as Mike D Consulting. So tell us
Yeah.
about that work.
So now I have my own consulting firm. So I've had it for about 4.5 years. And really what I do is training everything from classroom management, which I really call classroom culture, because it not just involves structure, but the culture has to come with it.
Yeah.
So like tier 1, tier 2, and all the way up to the tier 3 behaviors. Like the kids throwing the chair through the wall over and over again and having different issues. I really, really probably enjoy that work more than anything. But then
Yeah.
on top of that, I do a lot of coaching, whether it's with a group of teachers in PLCs or like going in and helping specific teachers working with kids, and showing them like how true interventions need to work and how it's not just written on a piece of paper and a thoughtful suggestion,
Yeah.
So yeah, so just like a lot of training, coaching, and
Yeah.
support. So
That's awesome. And I know that people appreciate and love that so much, because we know what a struggle behavior. I feel like a lot of times we hear behavior management, but we know what a struggle that can be for
yeah.
so many teachers, and it can create such a negative culture if we don't know how to approach it appropriately. It can just suck the joy right out of people.
Yeah, and it's a lot of people leave because of that.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
I always talk to folks like teachers and everything to give them this space of grace, because anything I learned behavior wise didn't come until after, I was in schools and working with these kids. And
Yeah.
when I was working directly with these kids, I had a lot of training, and went to the service center, I had a lot more training. But when you're in your teacher prep programs or your teacher certification programs, or college or university traditional for teachers, we get like 10 minutes of Harry Wong, which is a great book, by the way. It's the number one selling book for like the last 20 years in all of education. Go figure, because it's behavior.
Yeah.
But nothing like tier 2 or tier 3. And of course, no people skills, communication skills, which is an important part of behavior. And then the last thing is like, Casey, this is crazy. We teach the brain, like that's our jobs, is to input information in the brain. Like we never learn the different parts of the brain and how it's critical to that learning environment, right? So
Yeah.
us as adults can create havoc through that. And that's why it's so important that we really work through a lot of the processes, you
Yeah.
know?
So
So,
true. It's I worked at SFA, which is Stephen F. Austin State University, for
mhm.
a good while, or part of the charter school that's connected to it. And I taught as an adjunct professor as well. And that's one of the things that we always talk about is, where are the like classroom management courses?
Yeah.
Because when especially younger teachers, when they think about classroom management in their mind, it immediately is behavior management, but there's so much more to it. But they get all of the theory and all of the
Yeah.
pedagogical knowledge and background, and then you're thrown into the classroom and it's like not at all what they imagined it would be, right?
Yeah.
And like you said, they don't have those skills. And I would even bet that a lot of us grew up without the skills ourselves to be able to teach necessary.
Oh, yeah. 100%. Right. Yeah, for sure.
And
Yeah.
I even noticed that, and you may notice this too, even with teams of teachers working together. And I find that this is what makes PLCs sometimes and team planning so difficult, is because we never learned like true collaboration skills and how to manage conflict and how to have crucial conversations. It's really hard to engage with people who have different mindsets and ideas.
Oh, I agree 100%, because us as the adults, we influence behavior, what I
Yeah.
call non-productive behavior or productive behavior. So we say good or bad, both those are very judgmental, and judgment does us no good, right? But if we're having like crucial conversations, what I always call it is we have to think about connection, because our relationship It doesn't matter if it's with another adult or a kiddo or whoever, but that has to come first,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
it's our jobs to connect with the kiddos. It's not their jobs to connect with us. I've learned way more about Pokemon and Thomas the Train and Dungeons and Dragons, that it's really important that we kind of realize it's we have to have relationships, and
Yeah.
that fake it until you make it stuff is a bunch of bull. And
Yeah.
the reason why is because we read whether humans are authentic, even from a very young age. So I say connection, then direction. So that's what we teach, right? That's our content, pedagogy, and curriculum. And then we can go to redirection and have those crucial conversations, or kind of that tough love, but in a way where we can kind of connect. Because people don't genuinely love to be told something they're not doing right,
Yeah.
right? And that's
Right.
us as adults too. And so it's really important that we have all that stuff in stock before we kind of move forward with how that kind of goes. So yeah,
Yeah.
those crucial conversations are really, really important. And that's communication skills too. Like the
Right.
best part of those for us is we should be listening more than we're doing the talking.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
Which is incredibly difficult for a lot of people to do. We want to fill the silence.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
I've been
Oh,
trained in it. I'm still that way.
yeah. So can you talk a little bit more about productive versus non-productive behavior?
Yeah. So I'm glad you asked that question. When I first started kind of doing a lot of behavior support, behavior training, whether it was, PBIS, positive behavior intervention supports, or restorative practices, or tier one, tier two, we had good behavior and bad behavior. But most people usually don't understand that behavior is observable. Okay. Because we usually don't go that far. And so that's why functional behavior assessment is kind of hard for people to do. But what they will say, and you probably see this too in the work that you do talking with administrators, it's like a referral that's written. They'll say disrespectful, lazy, cussing, or whatever it kind of is, but they don't list the observable behavior. Whereas if
Yeah.
I say, Casey was talking at a turn in class. Okay, cool. I know the observable behavior. Now I have an idea of the direction I need to go once I found out the function of your behavior.
Yeah.
So just staying away from that, you know, as much as we can stay away from judgment, it's a very, very powerful tool. And you probably heard it in PLCs. You hear it in like teachers' lounges, as everyone wants to talk about the bad rather than the good. So I just
Right.
really started using like productive behavior versus non-productive behavior.
Yeah.
So, and there can be some subjectivity in that too, but a lot of it starts bringing it down when we just talk about the observables.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I want to talk a little bit more about that too, because I
Mm-hmm.
think that plays a really important role in the culture of a school and in the culture of a team, because I mean this show is all about building cohesive vision driven
Yeah.
teams. But it really, like, there are so many things you can talk about within that umbrella, because we can be a cohesive team around things that are really negative, and we can be a cohesive team around things that are really positive.
Yeah.
And when I notice when so many teachers get together to, it ends up becoming vent sessions, and that's where so many of the discussions about non-productive behaviors are happening. But because it's a vent, and because we are building this cohesion together around these negative behaviors, then we're creating a culture of negativity without probably even realizing it. Not to say that
Right.
there's not a time to vent, because we all
Sure.
need that, but how much better would it be if we were able to shift our language to productive and non-productive behaviors?
And so, really important point, and kudos to you for bringing up. We can be cohesive around productive or non-productive too, right?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
And the cohesive non-productive team is the team that does not move anywhere, and they're always looking for fingers to point rather than to look at the mirror, right? And say,
Yeah,
okay, what do we need to do? This is our issue. How do we move forward? then that's the productive, cohesive team. But it's like you said earlier too, not a lot of us have received training in how to really go through that. It's not just the agenda, right? It's how do we work together and problem solve and go through these processes in the way that are going to be that productive way as well. So
speak more about that, especially thinking about like how are adult behaviors. I mean, the title of this episode is Adult Behaviors and How it Influences Student Behavior. So speak a little bit to that.
Sure. So it's really simple, and you hear about it kind of everywhere, but I see a lot of people not understanding how to grasp it, maybe like because of a lack of training. So, like Rita Pearson, who when she was alive, like I'd follow her on YouTube and all this stuff. She's just amazing, and she's all about being a champion for kids and all this. So there's a really huge example of where she taught. She was kind of that champion. So the good rubs off on the good, right?
Yeah.
And the negative will run off on the negative. See, I just even went to good, but
it's hard.
Yeah, it's hard. But it's really kind of important because even she says, like, without a relationship, kids can't learn. So if you think about we're getting together to have a teacher meeting and we're just going to go to that negative zone, we can't, move forward because we're not building anything. We're not learning. The other thing I like to kind of point out is the Gottman Institute. I don't know if you're familiar with them or not. They're therapists for relationships, right? And so you've probably heard this, like 5 positives to every negative. Like that's what we need. Well, it comes from the Gottmans, right? And if we're like tier 2 or tier 3 behaviors, then it's like 18 to 1.
Whew.
Yeah, it's like a lot higher. And so it's really important to kind of understand how we need to focus on people's strengths, not their weaknesses. And I got to tell you, just because we're adults doesn't mean like we're free of weaknesses.
Right.
So, it's not do as I say, not as I do. It's I have to model that positivity within my groups, within my teams, help pick them up when they're down, like we all have those days. Like I wake up sometimes and I'm grumpy, or, the water heater goes out. You carry those packages to school. But what also is a great way to help out other adults that you're working with and even kiddos is just to say where you're at, right? Like with your feelings, and just to say, hey guys, you know what? Right here and right now, a little frustrated. It has nothing to do with y'all, but my water heater broke on the way to school and my kid projectile vomited, that goopy milk from when they're a baby on me. And I had to use a little Christmas tree to make me try to smell good. So can y'all help me with that? And it's so amazing when you're just vulnerable and you say, hey, can y'all help me with that? Kids are like, yeah, like I'll help you, because they understand, but they're not usually used to that. But the same thing works with adults too, because you can't fake it till you make it. They're going to read right away why we're frustrated. And most humans read it as you're frustrated with them rather than the circumstance.
Right.
So, yeah, it's just critically important. I'll tell you another thing too. This is a good reminder. And this is adult based. Okay. So the Gottmans have this thing, and I'm really I'm not quoting, but I'm going to kind of tell you how it works. So they did some research on family marriages that were falling apart. Okay. And they took away like abuse, neglect, anything like that. So they didn't research those, but they just researched like two adults who could no longer who were no longer agreeing, and it was time for them to separate. And so they said, like, just this basic question, how many positives do you need, or how many positives did you receive versus negatives? Or did you receive more negatives versus positives? So in my mind, like when I first was asked this question by one of my colleagues that sometimes I do training with, I was like, God, I bet you it's like 10 negatives to every positive. And she said, no, it was a 1-to-1 ratio.
What?
I know. So then they went further in their research, and basically what it comes up with? Humans are incredibly fragile.
Yeah.
I
Wow.
mean,
That's
it,
insane.
and this is with someone you're married to. So now
Yeah.
imagine how fragile kids are when their
Right.
prefrontal cortex hasn't fully developed and we're
Yeah.
not working through all that stuff. And then learning becomes harder. And then we go through this whole circus.
Uh-huh. Yeah. It's a great way to
So,
put it, for sure.
yeah. So,
Wow.
like, if you even think about those cohesive teams that we're building,
Yeah.
that's incredibly important to understand.
Right.
So even if me and you don't like each other in that team, we still have to put that aside to say, hey, this is about the kiddos. How are we going to get through this process?
Right. Yeah. I love this idea of saying where you're at and kind of letting go of this all too familiar phrase, fake it till you make it. Because
Yeah.
it's been ingrained in us, though. Like, I hear it all the time, and sometimes I say it. Like, I say it. I probably said it last week. Well, just fake it till you make it. But what a crappy what a crappy phrase. Who wants to
Yeah.
fake it until they make it? And I love how you're explaining how people can read through that. Even students read through that, and then because they don't have a good understanding or social awareness, really, they haven't built those skills, they can't see when something is about them and isn't about them. And I think it's the same for adults as well. Like, I immediately assume or make assumptions because of my own perceptions and my own perspective and reality. But when someone comes in and says, here's what's going on, I'd really love for you guys to help me out. It has nothing to do with you. This is just where I'm at right now. How much more powerful that is. I love that so much.
Well, and I
So,
tell teachers, like, that should be the very first thing. If you're teaching secondary and we're running bells,
yeah,
that's the very first thing you should say at the beginning of every period.
right,
And for elementary, pre-K, we should be saying it every time they go to, lunch or specials or whatever else and come back in. Because as a humans, our emotions are always changing throughout the day too.
right,
And it's really possible to be kind of like scared or upset or something and then be happy about something else. It's kind
right.
of your focus is on at that time.
Yeah. So
So
interesting. Huh.
here's another way to kind of think about it in behavior world too. And this is a really, really good advice for cohesive teams and kiddos. So we often tell kids to apologize. And like I see leaders doing this, right? And I even had a leader that I formerly had really preach this is like, when you do something wrong, you should go apologize. Well, now you're telling me to be remorseful, right? And
Mhm.
apology doesn't always mean remorse. In fact, a lot of times it's forced.
Yeah.
Okay? So if you're really kind of thinking about how this process works, sometimes remorse is like with my brothers, like if we were wrestling around and one was go too far, and we get kicked in the head or something like that, be mad at each other. My mom would make us apologize. Remorse was like, hey, you want to go throw the football? Because you're going back to that connection piece.
Yeah.
So if you're working with kiddos and adults, the same policy works. Tell them what you did for your behavior that's observable. And I'm
Mhm.
sorry I got in your face. I'm sorry I got upset with you. And don't throw a but in there because butts is now trying to get your way out of there. And then you say this, which is incredibly important. This is what I should have said better or done better. You
Mhm.
kind of explain now the productive behavior. And you simply say, I'm going to work hard on it, but can you help me work hard on it? You see how you flip it back to that connection side?
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, it's extremely vulnerable to
Right.
do,
It is.
especially with adults. And a lot of adults, when they're working with kids, are like, no, I
Yeah.
would never do that. I'm giving up my power. No, you're building connection. That's
Yeah.
real power.
Yeah, you're entering back into the relationship.
Yeah.
I love that. So, I just a side story. 2 years ago, I was working with a teacher who was new to the campus, and I went into her classroom. I had like done a quick little like just observation, and I met with her and said some things that I knew broke trust. And when I left, and it left her feeling defeated. And I mean, I was kind of, I don't know, I wasn't defeated, but I wasn't frustrated. It was just like I said things that I knew I probably shouldn't
Hmm.
have said, walked away. And it took me a good like couple of weeks to go back. And it was just at this random time, but I could not shake it. I couldn't shake that I had said some things, and went back to her and I said, when we met the other day, I think I completely destroyed your trust. And I know it's going to take some time to build it back. And I hope that, you will help me to do that and help me to recognize when I am breaking trust. It, and it's still not like to this day, I know there's still a little bit of hesitation there, but she appreciated that so much.
Yeah.
And it just strengthened our relationship.
Yay.
And, like, but it was so hard to do, to go in there and to say, "Hey, remember a couple of weeks ago, I'm gonna bring this up again. This awkward moment that we had together that was really uncomfortable. I'm gonna bring it up again." And anyway, but yeah.
Could you imagine if like we were really well trained in doing those things and
Yeah.
even talking about our emotions? Because like our generation, you didn't talk about emotions. We even
Right.
had that song "Don't Worry, Be Happy."
Yeah.
Right? It basically says if you're sad, you're not allowed to be.
Right.
No, just bring out your emotion at that
Yeah.
point in time. It's
Right.
vulnerable.
Right.
But guess what? If we're modeling that for other adults and we're modeling it for kids and we're being vulnerable, they're going to be more likely to do that. And if you always just say, "Hey, can I have your help with it?" It's
Right.
amazing what people will support you with.
Right.
Because I'm going to make 1.5 million more mistakes
Right.
before the day's over, usually.
For sure.
So I'll take all the help I can get.
Yeah. And, I think you would agree with this, but if we were able to do that more within our teams among the adults in the building, it's going to become a place where kids want to belong.
Yeah. It's culture, right?
Right. That's what it
And
is.
where adults want to belong.
Yes,
So
100%. So what is it that keeps us from getting there? In your opinion, why can't we make it to that? What's
I, th-
getting in the way?
I think if I had training, right? And good training on it, not just like 3 minutes. Like
Right.
there's things that we need to learn in communication, like how to listen and all those. I went through a 3-day course on listening because
Mhm.
how critical active listening truly is. But I think if I just had to put one word to it, it's the ability to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
And there's times when like it may take you some time to get there, especially with someone who you have had broken trust or issues with. And
Yeah.
it's okay, take your time, but do everything you can to make it there,
Yeah.
because it's really, really important for that. Um, and of course, supporting people in a positive way, making sure that they're, well taken care of. I love this, just, the little post-its, because I can write these on the spur of the moment. And if I just follow like a feeling, behavior, and an impact, and like the productive behaviors, it's amazing what this will do. And you don't even have to give it to them in person. You stick it on their computer, you put it in their box or wherever. And it's awesome when people read those things.
Yeah.
Like people just light up. They're like, oh, it's like way better than a Snickers bar. But
Yeah.
if you're still a Snickers bar person, put a Snickers bar with it.
Right.
It can only help.
Right. Yeah. Because people want to feel validated.
Yeah.
They want to feel like they're an essential part of the greater community. And if
Yeah.
we can feel that way, then we can portray that to our students. And, it's just that continuous, what do you call it? Like a domino effect,
Yeah.
Right.
100%.
Yeah.
Well, and what's cool about this, if you keep it small, you write brief.
Yeah.
And that's just as good as email that took you 20 minutes to write.
Right.
And this is a form of communication home to the parents too.
Yeah.
It's really cool when you hear stories about people who kids bring them home, they stick them up on their refrigerators or whatever. And don't be afraid to do it with the people that you struggle with, even the adults, because you're talking about a behavior that you observed them doing that was productive.
Yeah.
Like, hey, I really appreciate you refilling the coffee in the break room because I had 2 minutes to get a cup in between passing period and I need me some coffee to get through the day.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I always just say small things are the most important things. And with kids, sometimes you really struggle with the behavior. Sometimes it's like, hey, man, I really appreciate you sitting in your chair.
Yeah.
Right. That was really helpful. And it may have only been 5 seconds, but man, what a glorious 5 seconds it was.
Yeah, right. So true.
And it encourages people to have more productive behaviors as well.
Right. Okay, so we're coming up on the end of this. I have so many other things that I want to talk about. And I do want to talk about real quick. Okay. So let's talk about what strategies. You've already named some strategies that are so helpful. And if you are here with us in the audience, I do want you to just note how simplistic these are. Like, we're keeping it simple because that is what's sustainable. If it's not simple, it's not going to be sustainable. But at the same time, it's not so simple that it doesn't require strategy and intention. And I also want to note too, like, even if it seems so simple that it's not going to work, it takes practice.
100%.
Like, all of these things take practice. And for a lot of us, it doesn't come naturally. And it probably, for the most part, doesn't come naturally to a lot of us. So it does take like very intentional practice. But if you are intentional about it, it can become a habit over time. But
100%.
you have other like strategies that you recommend for educators or leaders so that they're creating this positive climate and culture for their school.
So probably one that's easy. It's a strategy and it kind of fits into any hole we need support in. And of course, I use this in intervention world. Is usually if we are consistently doing, culture killers or behaviors or whatever you want to call it, we have to think about that person probably lacks the skill of knowing how to do better, right?
Yeah.
So like structuring a classroom management is a lot about like, how do you set up your classroom and what are the rules? That doesn't work really well if we haven't built relationships, but it also doesn't work if we don't teach the skill, model the skill, and then practice the skill.
Yes.
And then repeat. So it's teach the skill, practice the skill, model the skill. And you can put any skill in there, right? Like whatever it would be.
Yeah. You said teach the skill, model the skill, practice the skill.
I'm sorry, teach the skill, model the skill, and then practice the skill.
Yeah. And this is really the same, not just for teacher to student, but within adult teams.
100%. Because if I'm kind of the leader of this team, and I needed us to be cohesive in a positive way,
right?
I need to teach the skill of how we're going to do that. I need to be modeling that skill, and then we're going to practice that skill. And some people say, oh, we don't have enough time to do all that. Well, if you do that your first week or you start doing it now, think of how much more time you're going to save.
Yeah. Right?
Yeah. So it's a very powerful tool.
Yeah. If we don't do that, if we don't spend the time doing that, then we're spending time making up for lost time.
Oh, yeah.
It's just constantly spinning your wheels. That's when we feel like we're hamsters in a wheel. Same problems over and over and over again.
Yeah. And was it Albert Einstein said?
Yes.
Definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over.
Exactly. But we do it and we see people do it. And I think it's truly because they don't have the training and skills to be able to know how to do something different.
Right.
Or the difference seems a little bit too challenging and complex. So we're just going to kind of stay where we are.
And we can't say like they know better.
Right.
They're an adult, they know better. They're in 5th grade, they know better. So to give you like a little bit of story around this really quick, I couldn't read until I was in 2nd grade for the second time, like not a lick. But I knew I should be able to read in
Yeah.
1st grade, right? I knew I should have been picking things up in kindergarten. All of my first 2nd grade year, like I knew definitely I should be reading, but I was lacking the skill that I could not pick up on that needed intervention to fix all that.
Yeah.
And so there's the same thing with us as just behaviors, relationships, and all this stuff works like with families, with your own kids at home, with
Yeah.
your siblings, with your significant other, because behavior is a whole human thing. It's not just kids.
Right. Yeah. And
So,
unfortunately, we develop habits that aren't great habits.
oh
And
yeah,
it's hard to break those habits,
100%.
I read something earlier today. I'm at a conference right now, and one of the slides showed, okay, I could be wrong about where I'm getting this information, but the quote, nevertheless, was something to do with it's no longer about like becoming well educated is no longer about how well you can read and write, but more about how you can learn, unlearn, or learn, relearn, unlearn, and learn again.
Yeah.
Which is so true. But
Love it.
we're really thinking about like unlearning habits is a hard thing, but
Yeah.
it can be done.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's an important thing too. And that's where also a lot of judgment comes into play.
Yeah.
Like if we're calling adults lazy or we're calling them disrespectful, but we're not teaching the skill, modeling the skill, practicing the skill, it's really kind of important that if they don't have that skill, or kiddos, judgment comes into play, say like lazy and all these other things. The kids start to believe that.
Yeah.
And when you start to believe it, you just kind of shut down because like, what's the point?
Right. Yes. Yeah.
And then it looks truly lazy, but it's just because the lack of that skill goes there.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Is it Ross Green who always says it's not that they can't do it, or it's not that they don't want to do it, but it's that they can't yet.
Yeah.
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 And it's true for adults as well.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And then that's where we go to cover up. Like we fake it until we make it. Yeah. And kids do the same thing. They either look for escape, or they, like all of a sudden they have a cough, or they need to go see the nurse, or whatever it is.
Right.
And it's because they're just trying to avoid that judgment piece, which is so critical for us as humans.
Yeah. And it's interesting too. I know we don't have time, but I would love to talk about that too. It's just like, what happens when we try to cover up some of the skills that we don't necessarily have? Mm-hmm. And I think about like collaboration, or even the lack thereof, because what I often call it is faux collaboration. It is truly just, we think we're collaborating, but it is just fake collaboration because we haven't learned true collaboration skills. Yeah. And then when things get uncomfortable, we like change the subject, or we get into groupthink, or, those kinds of things happen. And it would be so interesting to really study what's happening in our brain in that moment, almost as though it's like a fight or flight mode,
Yeah. Oh yeah. Because everything goes into our, emotional part of the brain. Right. And when we go down here.
Yeah. I don't know how to collaborate well. So I'm going to do this instead and call it collaboration. Right.
And we can't learn unless we're here.
Right.
We can't communicate. We can't anything unless we're up there. So that's awesome. Yeah. 100% agree.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this has been a fantastic conversation. And like I said,
I've enjoyed it.
Just keep going on. Like we could talk about this endlessly. But guys, if you're here with us, I would love to see you in the comments. Let us know what you feel like was most useful for you in this conversation with Mike D tonight. And Mike, what is something as we close that you would hope people would have gained most from our conversation? What do you want people to walk away with?
Well, first of all, if you're like, oh my gosh, some of this stuff's really hard, or I don't know if I agree, and you're maybe in a bit of a cognitive dissonance, give yourself grace. Because even though I say, like, teach, model, practice, that sounds easy, it's really hard to do. Yeah. So we need to make sure that we give ourselves grace, especially if we don't have those skill sets. Mm-hmm. And it's tough being a teacher. It's tough being an administrator. It's tough being a counselor. It's tough being everything right now in education. Right. So give yourself grace, and also give yourself pats on the back for small wins, right? Mm-hmm. Like, hey, everyone showed up to class on time today. Yeah. Give yourself a pat, right? Yeah. Oh my gosh, we learned how to do quadratic equations today. Give yourself a pat, whatever it is, just focus on yourself, just getting a little better each day. And that always starts with grace and not putting ourselves down when, mm-hmm. something goes kind of haywire.
Yeah. And it's really difficult for whatever reason, for educators especially, I find, and maybe it's just humans in general, it is hard for them to celebrate their wins. Yep. We're always looking for the next thing that needs to be perfected or adjusted or improved. But we have to pause and celebrate those wins. Yes, agree. Yep. Completely. Okay, where can people find you?
Oh, okay. So I have a webpage, mikedconsulting.com. You can go there. I'm also on Facebook, and it's just at Mike D Consulting. And you can find me there and click, follow or whatever you have to do. Yeah. And then I'm also on LinkedIn under Mike Desparrois.
Okay. So, yeah. Perfect. Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you, Mike, for coming and joining me tonight. And guys, you can catch all of this show on YouTube. You can catch it on Spotify for if you're a podcaster or a podcast listener, and it will also be on LinkedIn as well for the replay. And you'll see lots of things in the show notes after tonight's episode. So I appreciate you being here. And guys, I loved that you joined us, and share this with your friends. People need to know how to better understand adult behavior and how it influences student behavior, because that's where the key to culture lies.
100%.
All right. All right. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you. Later. Okay. Bye-bye. Bye, everyone.
Hey, guys, I want to give a huge shout out to you for tuning into today's Change Catalyst conversation. I would love for you to do me two solid favors. Number one, if you have enjoyed this or any other Change Catalyst conversation, do me a favor and hit subscribe. I've got a lot of great content and guests coming up, and I don't want you to miss any of it. Number two, if you are thinking of a friend or colleague who could benefit from this show, share it with them. The only way to make change happen is through a multiplier effect. And you can be a multiplier by sharing this show. Until next time, I want you to go off and do the great things that Change Catalysts do.